The digital rights bill that I came up with, I felt really quite confident when I came up with it. And like I said to you, when I did it, I did it with the help of AI. So I was confident from looking through the sources and everything that AI gave me that what I'd compiled would be enough to curtail this assault on our freedoms as citizens in the UK. But there was a nagging thought in the back of my mind that I might have missed something. There might be something that I'm not seeing that needs to go in there. So I did a double check, and I didn't double check with the AI that I used to consult for the original draft that I presented to you. I decided to go to Claude. So what I did, and I'll show you exactly what I did. I went to Claude, and you see this here. This is the paperwork that I presented to you last week. And I said to Claude, I'm trying to draft a United Kingdom Bill of Rights, which makes sure our government cannot implement digital ID, facial recognition technology, and CBDC. Can you analyse this for me, please, and let me know if there are any loopholes that could be found? So Claude analysed and said, strong foundational elements, which is cool. Your draft has several robust features. Constitutional level positioning above ordinary legislation, multiple overlapping protections, so defence in depth, rights-based framework rather than just regulatory restrictions, and strong enforcement mechanisms with real consequences. However, he identified some loopholes, as was my concern. So the overall assessment, this is a remarkably well thought out document that addresses the core threats effectively. The main vulnerabilities are emergency powers and national security exceptions, most critical, private sector workarounds, international and border control gaps, incremental implementation strategies, interpretation and amendment processes. The enforcement mechanisms are strong, but substantive rights could be tightened to close these loopholes. The draft already does better than most existing rights frameworks by anticipating soft coercion and requiring non-digital alternatives. These are crucial protections that many similar proposals miss. Okay, so that was Claude's overall assessment of what I'd shown. So with that in mind, I then went and redid the bill. So this is the UK Digital Rights Bill, protecting freedom in the digital age. And this will be a presentation that could be utilised to give other people an understanding of what this new Digital Rights Bill is about. So we have the digital rights crisis, mandatory digital ID, centralized database linking identity, movement, transactions, and behavior. Programmable CBDCs, digital currency with spending restrictions, expiration dates, and behavioral controls, and the biometric surveillance, facial recognition, eliminating anonymous movement in public spaces. Why existing privacy laws are insufficient. Consent becomes meaningless when refusal means exclusion from society. Emergency powers routinely suspend privacy protections. Private sector workarounds, government outsources to circumvent regulation. International obligations cited to bypass domestic practices. And function creep. Temporary systems become permanent. That's why our existing privacy laws are insufficient. Okay, so the solution, constitutional protection. So 10 core rights, personal autonomy and identity control, anonymity and non-traceability, non-digital access to all services, financial freedom and cash protection, privacy in public spaces, data sovereignty, no digital discrimination, human oversight of algorithms, technological transparency, and future-proof freedom. So that is the key protections. Prevents mandatory digital ID through any means, bans programmable currency and protects cash, makes UK a no-scan zone for biometrics, requires non-digital alternatives, cannot be suspended in emergencies, applies to private sector too, and automatic sunset clauses. And how it's enforced. Digital Rights Commissioner, independent watchdog with binding power, pre-implementation review, systems must be approved before deployment, criminal sanctions, personal liability for senior officials, constitutional protection requires 2 out of 3 majority to amend, private right of action, citizens can sue for violations, automatic sunset clauses, tech expires after 2 years unless renewed. Community oversight, local panels with binding authority. So, why this matters? The window for action is closing. Once digital control systems reach critical mass, they become politically and technically impossible to remove. So systems being deployed now are digital ID pilots, CBDC trials, and facial recognition cameras. Within 2 years, infrastructure becomes entrenched, alternatives are eliminated, and reversal becomes really difficult. After 5 years, it's too late for prevention, can only manage abuse, and freedom permanently reduced. So that is why it matters. Now, in international context, so examples of rights erosion through digital systems. China, social credit system, digital ID, facial recognition, payment controls, complete population monitoring and behavior modification. India, the Aadhaar digital ID started voluntary, became mandatory through service exclusion, now required for banking, phones, government services. European Union, the digital identity wallet, circulating cross-border identity tracking infrastructure under guise of convenience. And Canada, the banking restrictions, 2022. Government froze bank accounts of protesters without due process. So preview of CBDC's capabilities. So the UK opportunity, without the bill, digital ID becomes effectively mandatory. It can eliminate cash in favour of CBDCs, facial recognition everywhere, private sector circumvents regulation, emergency powers suspend rights, no path to reversal once it's entrenched. And with this bill, identity remains personal choice, cash protected as permanent right, public spaces remain surveillance free, private sector bound by the same rules, rights cannot be suspended, constitutional protections for the future. So the UK can lead by protecting both innovation and liberty. So what can you do? Well, you can share this information with your MP, discuss with civil liberty organisations, raise awareness in your community, support constitutional protection of digital rights. The time to act is now, before it's too late. So that's just a little presentation that I've put together, and I'm more than happy to send digitally to anybody who wants to go and talk to their local MP about this and to bring it up with them. And it's really concise. It gives you everything you need to know about why digital ID is so important for us to be looking at and the digital Bill of Rights is so important for us to be putting in place. So this is as if it was going off to Parliament. So this would be a parliamentary briefing: UK Digital Bill of Rights, constitutional framework for digital freedom, safeguarding autonomy, personal autonomy, privacy and liberty in the digital age. It gives you content so you can see. So I've stated the problem. I've then the current risks versus with this bill. Then I've had all of the amendments, and I've added the covering of those loopholes that Claude mentioned to me. We have the enforcement mechanisms in place, and then there's a roadmap of how it would be rolled out. So I'm going to share a couple of bits with you, not all of it, because there's a lot. There's quite a few pages here, but I am going to share a few bits. Okay. So, like I say, I've shared the problem, why there's a problem. This, I thought, even though I say so myself, was quite good. So, current risk versus with this bill. The following table demonstrates how the Digital Bill of Rights prevents specific threats to freedom that are inadequately addressed by existing legislation. So, mandatory digital IDs. The current risk: introduced as voluntary but made compulsory through service exclusion. No legal barrier to implementation. Article 1 makes identity control a constitutional right. No system can become de facto mandatory through coercion or incentivization. Programmable CBDCs can be implemented with spending restrictions, expiration dates, and behavioural conditions. Cash could be phased out. Article 4 protects cash as a permanent right, bans programmable currency, and requires CBDCs to be purely voluntary. Mass biometric surveillance. Facial recognition deployed in public spaces with minimal oversight. Real-time tracking creates chilling effects on assembly and speech. Article 5 bans biometric surveillance except under specific judicial warrant, makes UK a no-scan zone. Digital-only services. Non-digital alternatives eliminated. Citizens forced to adopt surveillance technologies to assess healthcare, banking, government services. Article 3 requires functionally equivalent non-digital access to all essential services. Digital-only citizenship becomes impossible. Emergency powers abuse. Privacy rights suspended during crises. Temporary surveillance systems become permanent. National security cited to bypass protections. Preamble explicitly prevents suspension during emergencies. Article 10 includes automatic sunset clauses. Rights cannot be bypassed. Private sector workarounds. Government outsources identity systems to private firms. Public-private partnerships circumvent regulations. Essential services require commercial digital ID. Article 2 explicitly applies to private essential service providers. Article 7 prevents discrimination based on technological refusal. Then we have the actual acts, and I'm going to skip through those, but you can see they've become much more comprehensive than when I shared them with you last week. There's the enforcement mechanisms with all of the loopholes pulled in. Then we have the frequently asked questions. So does this bill prevent legitimate law enforcement? No. Article 5 explicitly permits biometric surveillance under judicial warrant for specific individuals suspected of serious crimes. What it prevents is mass surveillance of the general population. Targeted, warranted investigation remains fully operational. The bill simply requires that surveillance be justified before deployment, not deployed universally and justified later. Won't this make the UK less competitive technologically? No, the opposite. Jurisdictions that protect both innovation and rights attract investment. Silicon Valley thrived under strong constitutional protections. Companies prefer operating where regulatory frameworks are clear and stable. This bill provides that clarity. Moreover, the UK would differentiate itself as a jurisdiction that harnesses technology's benefits without sacrificing freedom, a significant competitive advantage as other nations grapple with surveillance state concerns. What about international obligations and border security? We've already covered that. How does this affect private sector innovation in financial technology? The bill does not prevent private sector digital currency or payment innovations. It prevents government mandated programmable currency and protects cash as an alternative. Companies remain free to offer digital payment services. What they cannot do is require customers to use them exclusively or program restrictions into currency. This maintains competition and consumer choice, hallmarks of a healthy market. Won't requiring non-digital alternatives be expensive? Administrative costs of maintaining alternatives are modest compared to the infrastructure costs of universal digital systems. Moreover, many citizens prefer or require non-digital access for reasons of disability, age, or choice. Serving all citizens is a core function of government, not an optional luxury. The cost argument is often made by those seeking to reduce services whilst increasing control, exactly as is going on with the jury trials. What happens during genuine emergencies? The preamble explicitly prevents emergency suspension of these rights. History demonstrates that temporary emergency measures become permanent surveillance infrastructure. Genuine emergencies can be addressed through existing targeted powers that require judicial oversight. Mass surveillance does not make populations safer, it makes them controllable. The distinction matters. Is this politically feasible? Public concern about digital surveillance and control is substantial and growing across the political spectrum. Civil liberties organisations, privacy advocates, and citizens across political divides oppose mass surveillance. The question is not whether these protections are popular, they are, but whether permanent. The question is not whether these protections are popular, they are, but whether Parliament will act before infrastructure becomes entrenched and politically irreversible. Okay, there's the roadmap. So from going into Parliament, it would take probably 2 years to actually make sure all the provisions were met. So, in conclusion, the convergence of digital identity, programmable currency, and biometric surveillance creates unprecedented capacity for population control. These systems are being deployed now in democracies under benign justifications of convenience and security. History demonstrates that infrastructure built for benign purposes can be repurposed for control by future governments or during crises. The Digital Bill of Rights provides constitutional protection before such systems become entrenched. It does not prevent technological innovation or legitimate security measures. It prevents the specific infrastructure that enables authoritarian control, mandatory identity systems, programmable money, and mass biometric surveillance. The window for effective action is narrow. Once digital control systems reach critical mass, they become politically and technically difficult to remove. Citizens adapt their behaviour to surveillance. Bureaucracies depend on the infrastructure. Alternative systems atrophy. Reversal becomes nearly impossible. The UK has the opportunity to establish a different model, one that embraces technology's benefits while constitutionally protecting fundamental freedoms. This bill provides that framework. It deserves serious parliamentary consideration. So that's a draft copy. If I was an MP, that is what I would be putting forward when it comes to the Bill of Rights. So I wanted to share those changes with you because it's really important that anything that moves forward, anything that I put forward to anybody in power is right, and that all of the loopholes that could have been exploited have been identified and have been basically closed. And so that's my digital bill of rights 2.0.